From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And ahead for you today, K-State's Mike Stamm will recap this year's canola production in Kansas and the general results of K-State's canola variety and hybrid field trials. He calls it a productive year. He'll talk about what was learned from it. Also, K-State's Jonathan Aguilar will talk about what's happening with the Water Technology Farms program, which enlists producers and their crop fields to test out new approaches to irrigation and water conservation. Tours of these farms are coming up in August and early September around the state. And K-State's Charlie Lee looks at a new study of erosion control netting and the hazard it poses for snakes. Plus more coming up on this Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
We're glad to have you tuned in for another Agriculture Today. Well, the canola production season in Kansas is in the books once again, and as we'll hear from our guest, pretty decent year overall for those who raised this oilseed crop in the state. Mike Stamm has joined us once again. He's a canola agronomist with Kansas State University, and he has finished up, he tells us, his test plot harvests, and this has been a pretty good run, at least in your field trials, you say, Mike.
Yeah, Eric, we had one of our better years on record, actually, across the state, with some pretty challenging weather conditions, as we're all aware of. You know, we had places that didn't yield as well as others. We were, down in the lower 20s at the hardest hit locations, but in some other places we were pushing 70, 80 bushels to the acre, and that's just outstanding for the crop. And so we're happy about the year overall.
Just to point out, you have test plots not just in the southern reaches of the state anymore, correct?
That's right. We put test plots across the state in environments where we think canola could potentially have a fit, and we purposely put it in places like north central Kansas up at Belleville to give it a really good test, especially on the winter hardiness side of things. But like you say, we cover from basically the Nebraska border down to the Oklahoma border and all the way out into southwest Kansas around Garden City. So we test some pretty good environments.
So as you look at your locations, which was the absolute best performing location?
Actually, the best location this year was Garden City, mostly due to a fairly mild winter. We all had these fluctuating temperatures, a freeze-thaw cycle across the state. But, in terms of being just bitterly cold, it wasn't that cold of a winter. But then the moisture that they had out in Garden City this year, coupled with the grain fill conditions, just lended itself to some outstanding yields out there. And they actually only irrigated this crop, I believe, one time and only put on around an inch of water. The rest was just what Mother Nature gave them. So a great year out at Garden City. And another really good location that we had was Atkinson in central Kansas. I looked at the Mesonet data for rainfall from July 1 of 2018 to July 1 of 2019, and they had over 50 inches of rain, which is remarkable. But there, again, a fairly mild winter, but then outstanding conditions for grain fill with it being wet and cool, and that lent itself to some really nice yields at Atkinson as well, right around 60 to 70 bushel there.
And it's interesting because, as you've told us in years past, the nature of canola is such it does not like wet feet. So considering that, those sorts of yields are more than impressive.
Yeah, those are very good yields. However, in some other parts of the state where the water stood for prolonged periods of time, we did see the negative effects of saturated soil conditions. And I know that led to some concerns with the crop in the south central part of the state, which is actually where the majority of the canola acres are. But it was really something that was out of the producer's hands this year. The combination of the saturated soils in May being the wettest May on record, coupled with something that we saw, the crown rot that occurred because of the freeze-thaw cycle that we had over the winter.
You say that triggered multiple lodging issues around and about where those fields were saturated for an extended time.
Yeah, that's right. So with the freeze-thaw cycle, when we talk about the crown area first, the crown area of the plant is basically at the soil surface of the plant. And with that freezing and thawing over the winter, we saw lots of physical damage to that crown. And so basically there's cracking, and that allows fungi and bacteria to get inside the plant and basically rot it out. So you've got a weak stem. And then, again, we had the very nice conditions for grain fill, which produced lots of flowers and then lots of pods and lots of seeds, lots of weight on those weak stems. And then with saturated soil conditions, a weak stem and a crop that doesn't like wet feet, that led to the severe lodging that we saw in the south central part of the state.
In fact, to the point where you say some of those fields were not salvageable.
That's right. It all occurred at the wrong period of time. In the month of May or at the end of May, we're looking to be out there either swathing or desiccating and preparing that crop to be harvested. And a lot of producers in that part of the state just weren't able to even get out in the field to handle it at that time. Typically if it starts to lodge and we're at that swathing stage, handling when it's somewhat green and being able to get it into a windrow will allow us to at least salvage some of that lodged crop. But this year, producers down in that part of the state just weren't even able to get in the field.
Well, Mike, when you look at your results and the varieties and hybrids entered in the trials, what was learned about their individual performances?
Well, I'd say that the biggest lesson learned for me, particularly this year about the varieties, is that standability is something that we're going to really have to focus on in the future, both on our open pollinated side of breeding, which is where we've primarily been focused, but also on the hybrid side. And, with the changes in technology and winter canola varieties, we are starting to switch our breeding program over to more hybrid breeding. And we certainly saw this year that the hybrids had better standability than what the open pollinated varieties has, and that's primarily because of the hybrid vigor, with hybrids being just larger, more robust plants with deeper rooting and a stronger root system overall. And so that ability to stand in the field when the conditions weren't favorable was definitely an advantage of the hybrids, and that lended to the hybrids having higher yields as a general rule over the open pollinated varieties this year.
And generally speaking, don't want to make this an absolute, but it seems as if the winter survival question with canola has been solved. Is that too strong a statement?
I would say it's not entirely solved, but we've seen canola endure some pretty tough conditions here in Kansas over the years. Looking over the last 15 years or so, the name of the game this past year, again, was that freeze-thaw cycle. Mm-hmm. And like I said, the crop really came through that very well, except for that physical damage, which we really couldn't see until the plant was actually, in flowering and producing pods. The ability to withstand, bitterly cold temperatures, I would say, has certainly improved over the years.
And in that all-in-all, producer satisfaction with canola as rotational crop, pretty favorable at this point?
I think this year's, with the challenges for some producers, it's going to be a challenge for them to maybe think about expanding acres in particular this year. I hope that they continue to think about keeping at least part of their acres in rotation, because that's really the key with introducing winter canola into Kansas. Is it's a rotational crop that benefits the other crops that we grow, and we've certainly seen that in our winter wheat quality and winter wheat yields in the parts of the state, especially where we grow a lot of wheat continuously. So that's going to be my message to them is, at least keep some of your rotation in winter canola because of the benefits that it can bring to your cropping systems.
And the marketing opportunities remain reliable.
They're still there, that's for sure. We have the crushing facility out in Goodland. That is our primary market for the region. They are very open and willing to work with growers to get the crop delivered at the end of the season, and that's certainly not going to change.
Well, two things here. Soon, presumably, you will be putting together your canola variety and hybrid performance report that growers can refer to.
Yeah, we're currently working on summary tables for that. The number of locations we harvested and overall excellent canola harvest across the U.S. We've got a lot of data to process right now. So the overall summary comes out later in the winter, but we'll have a Kansas summary out very shortly, and we'll probably talk about that in the e-updates here in the near future as we get closer to planting.
And moreover, you're having a producer meeting in South Central Kansas a week from today to share what you have put together to date on the 2018-19 canola production season.
Yeah, so we're going to have a recap meeting down in Anthony. We'll talk a lot about variety performance and how well things did in the south central part of the state. We'll also talk a little bit about variety selection, some of the things that we learned this year in particular on standability and what to look for when selecting varieties for your cropping systems. And we'll also have some information on marketing, because I know there's some questions on local delivery points and kind of why our prices have been depressed lately. I mean, it's kind of across the board for most of our commodities right now, but canola's been down similarly, and so producers have questions about that. Then we'll also have a representative from the Risk Management Agency to take a lot of questions about insuring the crop. We had some issues with some fields in the south central part of the state that may not have been released in a timely fashion, and so I know there are some growers down there that are curious about, what are some of the rules on getting a field release, so they can move to something else if we happen to have another 2019 where we have the wettest May on record.
Great place to get your questions answered about canola production and the associated topics. That will take place, that meeting, in Anthony at the Bank Central Meeting Room, 10 o'clock next Tuesday morning, July the 30th. And inquire about that at the Harper County Extension Office. But all in all, Mike, with exceptions, this seems to have been a satisfying canola production year in Kansas.
For sure. From my perspective, we always learn something new about the crop. Having these high yields, we've certainly seen the yield potential of the crop. We take what we can get each year and try to move forward.
Right. Well, we appreciate the summary right here. Thanks for coming by. We'll have you back again soon.
Thanks, Eric.
In that the canola planting season will be upon us before we know it. Mike Stamm with us, canola agronomist at Kansas State University. Agriculture Today returns in a moment on the K-State Radio Network.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128-plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
We're back now on Agriculture Today, and turning to the topic of crop irrigation management, we welcome back in water resources engineer Jonathan Aguilar of K-State Research and Extension. He's based in southwest Kansas and is conducting truly cutting-edge research in that area, which we want to talk about a bit here, as well as some things that you irrigators might contemplate as you manage your systems here in the mid-part of summer. But what we want to feature first off here, Jonathan, something you're obviously deeply involved in, the series of water technology farm research projects. These have really taken off in the last couple of years. Remind folks of what the overall initiative is about, if you would.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here. Yes, the Water Technology Farm has been here for, I think this is the fourth year that we have been conducting this. It is still a farmer-driven or producer-driven project wherein the producers would approach us or either the Kansas Water Office and ask us what is the technology out there that they could try and figure out which one would work best in their field. We are excited about this because essentially what we are doing is extending our plots in the research plots, small plots, and trying them in a big producer's field. And so we started with 3 that were just looking at some items like mobile drip irrigation, also moisture sensors. And now we are involving almost around 10 to 15 farms out there that are not only just looking at the irrigation technology per se, but also looking at ways to control the water quality in their areas. So there are some water technology farms in the south central part of the state, as well as actually in the northeast corner of the state. There is one there that is focused more on water quality. So it has expanded itself. Because the good thing about this is that it's really producer driven. We don't dictate them protocols that they should learn, but they are actually coming in with problems in mind, and then we try to work with them to solve those problems, or at least give light to those problems and see if there are technologies or even management that they could implement in their field to be able to address those questions. But now we are already on our 4th year, and we are again on this time of the year that we do field days, opportunities for other producers to visit those fields and be able to ask questions. I think that's another neat thing about this water technology farm. These are peer-to-peer education. We allow the producers to tell their story, whether it's good or it's bad in terms of their use of the technology. We let them decide and share with other producers to be able for them to evaluate or give them an insight of what this technology entails.
It really is a ground truth, if you will, for those producers.
It is ground truthing. And some of the stories that they will tell is not very rosy. They had bad experiences about it, and they are frank about it. And in some cases, they like it, and they embraced it, and they implemented it to not just this farm that they are involved with, but also to other farms that they have. So it's really a breadth of things that are going on in these farms. But the August and September are usually the field days that they have, and this is the opportunity again for the producers to be able to come out and check out their farms and check out what they have been doing. There will be field days that will start on August 8th, as early as August 8th, which is on the very far west. We call it the Homeland Farm over at the Greeley County area. And then we finalize it at the northeast part, which is the Lois Hill Water Quality Farm. It's north of Kansas City. I think it's almost out there. So we've got a breadth here from west to east. We're going to have some of the field days. So August 8th and up to September 10th. These are all listed at the Kansas Water Office website under the Water Technology Farm. These are still being updated, but so far we have the dates nailed down already. So starting August 8th, 9th, 20th, and the 23rd, September 4th, 5th, and then on the 10th. So I just want to direct you to the Kansas Water Office website, and soon we will be also posting this in our K-State Research and Extension websites soon. So if you have an opportunity, visit one of these farms. We visit one that is closest to you, because in our idea, the closest it is to your farm, the more there is similarities in these farms, particularly in their management and the soils and the weather. You could essentially try to associate yourself or your farm or your management on these farms.
Jonathan, it's impressive how swiftly and effectively this series of technology farms has expanded in recent years. You mentioned a couple of the keystone technologies that are being tested out in western Kansas, mobile drip irrigation, the water sensors, but there's other technology out there that you're equally excited about.
Yes, actually there's a lot more technologies out there. As I mentioned, it's not just the technology or the hardware per se, but there's also the management. In most of the water quality farms, they're looking at the management itself, with till or no till, and also the cover crops, and as well as some of the producers are also trying some of the drought tolerant varieties. Mm-hmm. So they have an idea of what they're trying. Again, this is more producer driven. If you ask a producer what could they do to be able to conserve water, they've got a list of other possible ways to do it. And so we are approaching them from what their idea is and trying them in their farm and see for themselves and try it for themselves carefully with some design in terms of the protocols. Try to let them see for themselves which one is working for them.
Excellent. Once more, go to this website, kwo.org. That's where you'll find the full listing of the Water Technology Farm's field days starting in early August, continuing through early September, various locations around Kansas. Now, in our remaining time, Jonathan, a quick look here at middle of the summer irrigation management. In that it's been a relatively wet year, one might think that management would be less intense, but maybe not so. We've had a few hot days of late as well.
Yes, and I just want to share some things that you would like to note because we have had this experience just a few days ago. Walk your field and see if there are any plugs in your sprinkler packages, because it could happen. Just a small plug, or it could be an incrustation or a rust, could plug your system. And if it is actually located on the outer part of your field, it could impact your yield, definitely. In some cases, we've done some math. It could be costing you 60 bushels in one field. So it is important that you walk your field, check for plugs, and see what you have out there, because who knows, it might be leaking or it might be plugged, just to make sure that as the hot days comes in, you are prepared about that and you are not losing all of the possible yield in your field. That's one important thing, is to walk it and just try to see that your system are all going well.
Do producers need to re-examine their irrigation scheduling intentions likewise right now?
That's true. We've been also pushing the CanSched, which is the ET-based scheduling. We have been revising it, but it's a very important tool, whether it is an ET-based scheduling like CanSched or a soil moisture sensor. We'd like you to make sure that you know what your soil is holding right now. You don't want to over-irrigate because we've got a lot of rains already and you've leached much of the nutrients already, and you don't want to exacerbate that. You don't want to add more to that one. So you want to make sure that you're adding just the right amount of water for your crop so that you're not leaching it. At the same time, these soil moisture sensors, this CanSched, sometimes it will tell you that you have to irrigate. So it doesn't always mean that you are catching up with the irrigation, but this is also one of the ways that you have confidence that, okay, even though if it is raining, if I have to irrigate, then I have to irrigate, because you know what your soil is holding on to that soil. So just some quick reminders for the producers out there to be mindful about their resources and their inputs. So irrigation is still an input, so it will reduce your input cost. So I know that the prices now of commodities are a little bit iffy, so anything that we could help you, we'll try to remind you about that.
And of course, irrigators should take full advantage of the online tools for irrigation management available through K-State.
That's right. So we've got most of our tools available at the Mobile Irrigation Lab. Just Google the Mobile Irrigation Lab and it will show you the one in K-State. There's probably a couple of Mobile Irrigation Lab. I know that there's Florida has already also used that word, but Mobile Irrigation Lab that is in Kansas, that would put you back in the right mind.
Very good. Well, in the research sense, this is a very busy time for you and your colleagues, so we appreciate you taking the time to stop by and share all of this with us. Jonathan, thank you.
Thank you very much.
He's a water resources engineer for K-State Research and Extension, once more working out of Southwest Kansas, Jonathan Aguilar. And a quick reminder once again about those Water Technology Farm Field Days coming up in August and September. Excellent opportunities to learn from your peers, producers, about what's working, what isn't in the way of technology and water management systems for crop production. Check out that list at kwo.ks.gov. kwo.ks.gov. Also look for more information shortly through your K-State Research and Extension resources. We'll be back with more. You're tuned to Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Agriculture Today is back now on the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson with you. Well, our soils in Kansas are definitely drying out some, according to the Kansas Crop Progress and Condition Report for this week from the USDA. For the week ending this past Sunday, topsoil moisture is now at 3% surplus and 70% adequate, 27% short to very short now. Subsoil moisture at 5% surplus, 80% adequate, and 15% short to very short. The condition of the corn crop in the state this week, 57% good to excellent, 31% fair, and 12% poor to very poor. Corn silking now at 54%, the average for the date 74%, so well behind the average. Dough stage at 13%. Soybean crop condition 50% good to excellent, 40% fair, 10% poor to very poor. Soybeans blooming now at 28%, that's well behind the 52% average. And the state of the grain sorghum crop in Kansas, 72% good to excellent, 21, make that 24% fair, and 4% poor to very poor. Sorghum headed now at 7% around the state. Range and pasture conditions at 75% good to excellent this week, 21% fair, and 4% at poor to very poor. For a glance now at the condition of corn and soybeans nationwide, we turn to the USDA's Gary Crawford.
Hot and humid weather from the plains eastward, good for crop development over this past week.
But crops are still behind the average pace, and in a few cases, it hurt conditions.
USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey told us one of those cases, corn.
Corn condition during this hot, humid week dropped slightly overall. Nationally, 57% of the corn rated good to excellent on July 21st, down a point from last week, significantly below last year's 72%.
But there are some states where the corn's really suffering, and as we start this week,
4 Midwestern states, Indiana, Michigan, Missouri, and Ohio, all with more than 20% of the corn crop rated in very poor to poor condition.
Corn crop development, we doubled the amount of corn silking over this past week, taking it to 35% of the crop, but the average, of course, is much higher, 66%. The nation's soybean crop hanging in there over this past week, and unlike corn,
soybean condition held steady despite the heat and the humidity.
Rippey says as we start this week, 53% of the soybean crop rated in good to excellent condition, 12% in poor to very poor shape.
But that's far below last year's condition of 70% good to excellent and 8% very poor to poor.
In fact, a couple of states are really having problems with more than 20% of their beans in poor to very poor condition.
That's Ohio at 28%. Indiana at 24%.
As far as soybean development, the percentage of the crop starting to bloom is up from last week's 22% up to 40% this week.
That, though, is still behind the 5-year average of 66% and last year's 76%.
Likewise, only 7% of the nation's soybeans are setting pods. The average pace for this time is 28%. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
This being a Tuesday, we bring to you Dairy Producers Now, the weekly feature Milk Lines. Standing by with that, K-State Dairy Specialist, Mike Brook. Mike?
Today I want to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning feeding consistency on their dairies. As we think about being consistent and what we're doing in our feeding program on our dairy, there's maybe a couple different ways we can look at that. We could look at it as feeding the same ration every day, or we could look at it as feeding the same nutrients each day. There is a significant difference, and one of the reasons I want to address this a little bit is we have some issues with forage supply probably staring us in the face. As we look at our inventories of corn silage and haylage on our farms, as we look at the potential harvest that we may be looking at for the rest of this growing season, we may start to see some concerns as to how consistent we can be in delivering the same ration to our cows every day. In other words, the same amount of corn silage, same amount of small grain haylage, or the same amount of alfalfa hay or haylage in the diet. Being able to do that for the next 12 to 18 months based on what we see in terms of what we have growing out in the field, as well as what we have in inventory on our farm. As we look at alfalfa specifically, there was a tremendous amount of winter kill in the upper Midwest. A lot of acres were lost to that. We've had a lot of harvest issues so far this year. terms of excess rain. As a result of that, we've actually started to see the prices of alfalfa hay rise a bit. Demand may be an issue as well as producers in other areas look to replace part of their, say, corn silage in their diet with alfalfa or other things that they can move from a greater distance. So we may see increased competition for some of the supplies of hay that we normally have available to us. So as we look at this from a farm perspective, many of our producers are feeding diets that contain a lot of corn silage. This has been a good thing for our cows and production in many cases. However, as we look forward, how much corn silage are you actually going to be able to harvest this fall? Is it going to be enough to sustain the amount that you're currently feeding in your diets? If not, might be better to start trimming back the amount of corn silage that we currently have in our diet and bringing in some other products so that we can serve what we currently have in inventory so it might carry us through the 2020 feeding season. So on your farm, very, very important to, number one, sit down and get an accurate handle on what you actually have in inventory and then also what you expect to harvest this fall. Sit down with your nutritionist then and carefully consider this along with the number of animals you expect to be milking over the next 12 to 18 months and determine whether or not we're going to have enough feed to carry with our current feeding program. If we're not going to have enough inventory plus harvest, we probably need to consider some alternates. As you start to consider alternates, you will likely bring in some fibrous byproducts, things like corn gluten feed or maybe wheat midds or whatever that might be available in your local market. However, one of the things you have to consider is that there can be some nutrient variation in these byproducts. So make sure you have a good handle on that nutrient variation. Make sure you're dealing with a consistent product that's coming from a consistent supplier. If you're going to be using several different suppliers, these products could be coming out of different plants, which may result in a lot of variation in the actual nutrient content of the product that you're feeding any given week, or in some cases, maybe any given day. Again, you need to work through these issues with your nutritionist to make sure that that's adequately covered in the way that you balance and put together the diets. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to take careful inventory of forages available, as well as looking forward to forage harvest and making some critical decisions about current feeding programs so that we might be able to stretch limited supplies of forages through 2020.
Good input, Mike. Many thanks. We'll talk wildlife management with K-State's Charlie Lee next on Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This Agriculture Today comes to a close with another look at wildlife management, featuring wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension, Charlie Lee. Charlie, today a look at what you call an unintended consequence of using what are called erosion control materials out on the land, where snakes can become entangled in those materials.
Yes, these are products that are sold to reduce erosion, improve water quality, and promoted as being natural and environmentally friendly. They're typically a natural material, whether it's jute, which is a burlap-type material, or core, which is made out of coconut husk, or straw, or hemp. Those would all be the products, and some of those then would be blanketed between two layers, or sometimes just one, of a polyethylene mesh to help that natural material stay in place. Those products are put down a lot of new landscaping projects. They're also used quite frequently on road construction. And the erosion rate at road constructions has been suggested may be 100 times greater than the erosion off of agricultural crop fields. So there's certainly a need to control that, but there are some negative consequences of using these products, primarily because of the impact to reptiles.
And this is not just a casual observation. There was actually a study in Texas which examined this concern.
Yeah, there was a pretty interesting study that just came out in the Wildlife Society Bulletin last month. They actually took the approach of first doing the literature review, looking to see what other people had reported on species, number of animals that had been captured, and the type of mesh that they were entangled in. Then they also did a field survey. They went to 9 different areas on construction projects in Texas, did 20 different surveys, which was 65 different site visits over 40 days, and examined the sites for reptiles that were entangled, and then salvaged which ones they could, and just brought those that had died back to the lab for measurements. Then they also completed this with doing some entanglement trials. They used different types of these erosion control blankets. They had an artificial lab set up about 25 feet by 5 feet with an opening about 1 square yard in the middle that was not covered with these materials. And into that opening, they introduced individual snakes, totaling 128 different snakes of different species into that opening, and then in a 5-minute period, watched those snakes and prodded them to move if they just stayed in the opening, and then determined the fate of those animals, whether they were able to navigate through those erosion control blankets or whether they became entangled.
Just for the record, the types of products they were using, how did they differ from the other?
Well, the types of products varied in the number of different layers, the percent that was polyethylene, percent straw. Those that had the smaller mesh, the finer mesh, and the more layers of mesh seemed to entangle more snakes than some of the other products. It's kind of interesting that the smallest mesh was significantly more likely to entangle snakes compared to those that had larger diameter polypropylene mesh, and those that had the mesh that was woven out of natural fibers, those seemed to have the fewest entanglements. They did come up with a result that said for every 1 millimeter increase in the body's circumference, the probability of entanglement increased about 4%. So the larger snakes are more likely to get entangled. There also was a difference in the species of snakes that got entangled. Those snakes that practiced what's called a active foraging, meaning they're moving around hunting for prey, seem to get entangled more frequently than some of the other species. So the types that were found in the road construction projects in Texas were racers, coach whips, rat snakes, and there was one plain belly water snake. So those were the 4 most frequent species that were captured in that particular trial. So I think what we can gain from this is keep in mind these products probably need a thorough review. I know snakes are not that popular. In most popularity contests, snakes are going to lose, but I think most snakes certainly play an important role. They deserve our respect and appreciation, and if we're using products that's promoted to be environmental friendly, we need to look at all aspects of those type products. There are some significant management implications with using these products, and if we can do a better job of articulating some of those challenges, perhaps these companies making erosion control blankets can modify their process and truly make them environmentally friendly.
But as this study points out, you say nearly 50% entanglement here, so that's a number that just can't be ignored.
It's certainly a high number. It reminds me of a personal exposure to this problem just a week or so ago on a youth activity I was involved in, where we've, in just a very short period of time, in about a 25 square foot area, found 3 rat snakes entangled in this same type material. So it tells me that this is a problem that probably needs some more research into the solutions so that we can have some erosion control as well as having very few entanglements by snakes or other reptiles.
Again, the issue being snakes becoming tangled in these erosion control materials that you see commonly in construction areas, along roadways, and in other venues. Charlie, thanks for a look at this study out of Texas concerning this problem. Charlie Lee is a wildlife specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Well, again, our time is away. Before we go, to invite you, if you haven't done so already, to check out our podcast service. Each of our daily broadcasts right here posted to the website for your listening at your leisure or for downloading automatically to your mobile device. In either case, visit agtoday.net to listen directly or once again to subscribe to the podcast download. Once more, that's at agtoday.net. Meantime, please rejoin us right back here this same time tomorrow, won't you? Until then, Eric Atkinson here, bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.